Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, like it, share it, review it, pass it around to everyone you know, talk it up, in a very nice and complimentary way. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram at Chicopee. Visit their state-of-the-art dealership on Memorial Drive next to BJ's and Big Y, or go to metrojeep.com and drive home in your new Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram today. And now, here's today's very special bonus episode of Baxie's Musical Podcast.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast. Resistance is useless.
In order for a partnership of any kind to last 33 years, a band, a marriage, a business relationship, whatever, a couple of things should probably happen. The first of which is you should like what you're doing. The second thing is you should like the people you're doing it with. Otherwise, you hardly ever get to 33 years, because if you can't satisfy requirement number one, then you're never going to satisfy requirement number two. And if requirement number two isn't happening, then you can forget all about requirement number one. So when a band can endure a 33-year-long career and still enjoy doing it without killing each other, that says quite a lot about the band and the people who are involved with it. A perfectly good example of this happens to be Pansy Division. Since 1991, lead singer and guitarist Jon Ginoli, along with bass player Chris Freeman, have been the driving forces behind what was the first openly gay rock band in history. And while that's an undeniably important part of their history, they might have been just another footnote had it not been for the fact that Pansy Division happens to be a really great freaking band. A great band that has lasted more than 3 decades, combining great songwriting, solid musicianship, and often hilariously irreverent and always entertaining lyrics. In other words, Pansy Division has always been a whole lot of fun. But their place in music history should not be overlooked, because prior to Pansy Division's first singles being released on Lookout Records and then eventually on Alternative Tentacles, there were no openly gay rock bands to speak of, meaning that an entirely untapped population of people who were isolated out of the fear of the stigma of being gay in a world where prejudice, hostility, and violence would be the norm, finally had a voice that validated who they were as individuals. Over the course of the next decade, musicians and entertainers would become more open about their sexual identity. But prior to 1991, it wasn't always so simple, and Pansy Division were the first ones to kick down that door. In April of last year, I interviewed Chris Freeman when his other band, Gacy DC, were coming through Boston. During that interview, we talked a little bit about Pansy Division, but we never got too deep into it because we were kind of focused on other things at the time. However, there are some important things going on with Pansy Division, including the fact they're going to be on the road this fall. In fact, they'll be headlining an all-ages show at the Faces Brewing Company in Malden, Massachusetts on September 19th. If you know anything about Pansy Division, you know it's going to be an absolute blast. So when I had a chance to talk to Jon Ginoli, I knew I had to squeeze this in as a very special bonus episode. This is my interview with Jon Ginoli from Pansy Division on Baxie's Musical Podcast.
Hi, Mike.
How you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
Really good. Great to have you. Yeah, I don't know why this strikes me as being so funny and takes me back to my youth, but you guys are playing in Malden, Mass on the 19th, and it's an all-ages show, which brings me back to the days where you could see 35 bands for $5 in a 2-hour show, and I for some reason, I just love that. It totally brings me back.
Well, you know why it's all ages? Because it's a restaurant. It's a restaurant. It's a brew pub. So they serve alcohol, but it's a restaurant. And kids are allowed to go into restaurants. So I'm wondering why more bars haven't figured this out, but so it goes. But I think it's amazing that we can play this pub and anyone can go. So it makes up for it not being in Boston.
Right.
But it's weird. This is happening all over the country, where the central city isn't the place where the clubs are anymore.
Right.
Because it's gotten too gentrified.
Yeah.
So now we have to go out to the burbs, opposite of the way it used to be. So funny.
I'm in my late 50s. You guys are just like a little bit older than me, but not by much. At our age, an all ages show kind of reminds me, is there going to be a senior citizen discount? Can I wear can I wear my orthopedic Doc Martens with the Velcro straps? I mean, that's what I think of as an all ages show now.
One of my roommates from when I was in my 20s said he's coming to the show, and he's like, wow, it's amazing to be 60 plus going to an all ages show. I'm like, all right, Pansy Division keeps you young or something.
Last year I interviewed Chris. He was coming through the area with Gacy DC, and it was an absolute blast. He was absolutely hilarious talking to him. But you and Chris have been at this for 33 years, which is an incredibly long time for any partnership to be together. I mean, after all this time, what keeps you guys going? I mean, what keeps Pansy Division together after all this time?
I think what keeps the band together is the fact that we haven't done it full time for a long time. So instead of it being a band that took over our lives or dominated our lives, I mean, I think the first decade it really dominated our lives. And then the second decade, we still kind of planned our life around it so we could do longer tours, but we were working and doing other jobs. But as time has gone on and we've gotten more separated geographically, we haven't done it as often, though we've continued to do it. Every year there's some shows except for during the pandemic.
Right.
It's now we have to get on a plane to do it, but in some ways that's nicer because getting in the van can really be fun, but also really be tiring. So now we tour in little clumps. So this little clump is doing 2 weekends in a row, which we almost never do. But because band members live on the East Coast, we're doing 3 shows, then going to one of their houses, and then we're all going to work from home for several days, and then we're going to go back and do 3 more. So it takes second billing to the rest of our lives, but that's why we're able to still do it. It does really mean, though, that we don't have time or, geography to be able to work on new stuff. But, we have 9 albums. We have plenty to choose from. So I think there's enough Pansy Division music out there for people to find. If they just don't think there's enough, there's more.
I was just watching the 2007 documentary on YouTube, Pansy Division, Life in a Gay Rock Band. And, I think back to 91 and even, long before that, when you really think about what things were like back then, and the fact that there really were no rock bands that were out. I mean, even, Rob Halford from Judas Priest didn't reveal he was gay until 7 years later. Bob Mould didn't do it from Husker Du until 1994. Even the Ellen DeGeneres episode didn't happen until 1997. In 1991, this was a pretty bold step forward, especially at a time when there was still, a lot of fear about being stigmatized or, whether someone who made this announcement would ruin their career. Tell me about the decision to form this band and to be boldly out at a time when people simply were kind of afraid to.
Well, I had this idea that there should be a gay rock band, but it didn't occur to me for a while that I should be the one to do it because I thought, it's inevitable that this is going to come along. And there were a few people who had the same idea at the same time we did, but because it seemed like the timing was right. But, I kept waiting for something that I wanted to hear, and I realized, well, I'm a musician. If I want to hear this, I could actually do this. And the fact that I had no career to maintain, or, I'd had my indie band, The Outnumbered, play, they're an 80s rock band. We did 3 albums. They got a little bit of notice, and then I thought, well, I did it. I wanted to have a band. It put out records. It did tours. Some people liked it. It was great. So I thought, all right, I've got that out of my system. I'm going to leave Illinois, where cheap place to live, good place to have a band, middle of the country, a lot of conveniences. So I thought, well, I'll go to San Francisco. Not a good place to have a band. It's expensive, though I had no idea then how much more expensive it was going to get. But back then, SF was still pretty cheap. But you're in the Midwest. I lived in houses. In San Francisco, you have to live in an apartment, so you can't rehearse in the basement.
Sure.
So it's one of those things that just makes having a band be easier. So I thought once I got to California and I moved in 88, I thought, well, that's the end of bands for me. So, but I had this gay band idea just because I wanted to see it. And I thought, I'm going to do it. And I dared myself to do it because I thought this could really get some backlash. We could really be attacked. But I felt safe doing it in what I felt was my San Francisco Bay Area cocoon. I thought, we're going to have fans here. And my initial expectations for the band was that we'd be big in San Francisco, and I don't know about anywhere else. I'm sure if you're popular in San Francisco for that, there's other cities where it's going to work too.
Of course.
But it's not going to be something where it's going to, allow you to tour for weeks or months at a time. So we, underestimated ourselves and underestimated that we were appearing to do this at the right moment in time. So, timing was really helpful for us, but if we hadn't done it, there were other bands who would have taken up the mantle, but we did it in a particular way. And, we're in our 30s, and, you look around at bands and, bands are full of young people and they're so good looking, and we weren't exactly ugly ducklings, but we're like, oh yeah, here's our band, Pansy Division. We're going to start this. It's going to start something. And in a few years, some young 20-somethings are going to come out and just zoom into the mainstream, and then we'll be has-beens. And that didn't happen. And when there finally were gay musicians in the mainstream, it turned out to be pop in the 21st century. And all the artists that you just mentioned who hadn't come out yet, that we suspected or heard rumors about in the 90s, they all came out after their career peak. So they didn't have as much to lose then by being open or being honest about that aspect of their lives. So for us, we thought, we have nothing to lose. The playing field is wide open. We're just going to grab it and go. And it really worked out. And again, a lot of luck was involved, but we had to do it, and we did it, and it worked. And that's one reason why I'm still here talking to you, because we hit at the right moment.
In the film, both you and Chris are talking about something that I thought was really, really interesting. And it was the reaction that you were getting from fans, particularly, younger gay kids who didn't feel at the time that they could come out to their parents or friends or at school or whatever, but that the music that you guys were releasing was really validating at a time when nobody was speaking their language. I mean, it's a pretty powerful reaction that this was listening. I mean, and it's not just validating for the young fans, but it had to be validating for you too, since clearly you were on to something significant where there was a drastic, wide open need for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it fulfilled a lot of needs for Chris and I that we became the band that we had been waiting for and had wanted to see, and thought, gosh, if we had heard this when we were 15, it would have been so helpful. It would have really blown our minds and really would have really been validating for us. So we thought, well, if we can provide that for other people, then, apart from just indulging our egos and being able to go on stage and perform, we actually have all this other dimension to our band where it really does serve a kind of public service for the people that need it.
One of the things about Pansy Division that's so clear, you're not only making a statement, but you're doing it with this great and totally irreverent sense of humor with very little filter, but you're surrounding it by songs that are almost every bit as strong as the statements you're making. And to me, that's really important. I mean, it's not just that Pansy Division was the first openly gay rock band, but the band and the music were pretty damn good too. I mean, otherwise, people might not take a song like, Dick of Death or Cocksuckers Club seriously, but the band had to be good to make that statement really relevant.
Well, thank you for pointing that out, because it's really true that no matter what you sing about, music is something that you're going to be listening to, not reading a lyric sheet. So no matter how good your lyric sheet is, you've got to have songs that people actually want to hear and enjoy listening to and playing. So that was, I think, one of the reasons why we took off in the way that we did, was because we had both sides of that. And I thought that that was necessary. So when I had just written a couple of songs for Pansy Division, maybe 3 or 4 songs, I remember going to a party in San Francisco where somebody said, hey, bring your instruments. You know, we're going to have a party. We're also going to have like people performing. And I thought, okay, you know, gay crowd, gay party. So I went to this party with my guitar, and there was a guy performing before me who did the most wounded heart, painful, sad, just infliction of his condition on us. And, you know, people clapped politely. And then afterwards, I played the Cocksucker Club, and the room erupted. And I thought, I really am on the right path here. People really get a kick out of this. And, you know, it wasn't just that it was gay either, but, you know, there's plenty of gay people making music now whose lyrics don't really address the gay angle. And I mean, that was one of the things that we were really on about in our early days. After a certain point, though, for us, we reached the point where it's like, okay, people know we're a gay band now. We don't have to address it in every song. But at that time, I thought, we're not just going to be a gay band. We're going to sing about gay subject matter. We're going to sing about gay stuff. And that was going to make us different also. And then I thought, well, I really want to sing about sex because it's the time of the AIDS crisis where we're all supposed to go hide our sexuality away and also, you know, be told not to have sex, period. We knew how to use condoms. That's how we managed to survive the pandemic. We were lucky to have not been infected at the time before we knew about those things. But that's how our lives had gone. And so we were there trying to celebrate sexuality at a time when the sexuality was under attack. And I thought, okay, we've got to make it humorous because that is how the message goes over. That has cut both ways, though. It led some people to think, well, we're not a serious band. We're a jokey band. And some songs have jokes in them or humor in them. But I think it's that combination that really worked. And I have to say, it didn't all come to me at once. It had to evolve a little bit. Then I realized what I wanted to do, and really that blueprint has held.
Because I mean, I really want to ask you about those early shows. I'm glad you kind of you pointed at it a little bit, because it would seem to me that in 1991, you know, that the reactions of people early on, you know, when they're first hearing this for the very first time, and not necessarily just, you know, in front of gay audiences, what was the reaction there? I mean, were they getting it right away, or were they saying, okay, you know what, this is almost too gay for me? I mean, what was the reaction for, you know, a larger crowd?
People who are listening to rock and roll, who heard it, a lot of those people went, wow, I've never heard anything like that before. And I remember some straight women telling me who loved it said, you know, I thought something like this would have happened a lot sooner. Like, I kind of expected, you know, to be able to hear this angle, and you finally done it. But, you know, they were surprised that nobody had ever done this before. The thing about the gay scene or gay culture, whatever you want to call it, is it is not oriented towards rock and roll. And that was one of the big gaps in my life between the understood gay culture, which is disco, show tunes, dance music. Although I always argued with what dance music meant, because people danced to a lot of different things over the decades, but the gay crowd saying, we only dance to this kind of music. But anyway, that was, you know, we were winning over some people who loved it because it was racy and really in your face at a time we needed that, who like really wouldn't have listened to another rock band, certainly not a punk rock band, but who really appreciated what we did. And then there were people in the punk scene who were just like, I mean, I remember the reaction I used to get, and I still hear it from people who had this reaction long ago when they first heard it, was they just couldn't believe that this subject matter was present in the punk scene. Like you would hear all these punk records singing about all these, personal and political stances, but to just be so matter of fact about it and singing about it unashamedly, it really did shock people. I mean, some people were probably shocked in a negative way, but so many people were like shocked to hear something so brazen within their scene, within the milieu of the music we listen to. So in some ways, it was kind of I don't think it's an approach a lot of gay people who are looking for acceptance society-wide would have done. They would have, tried to do it in a more, I don't know, mainstream gay way. Maybe you can say that now. So we were really coming at it from an odd angle, but that was the angle we were coming from. And that was an angle that really appealed to a lot of people, that it really filled a need and bridged a gap. So for me, it was trying to bridge my gap between the gay culture that often alienated me and told me that my interests were not gay. And, between that and, the music scene where most people who are listening to this music are heterosexual, but then you find out that, well, some of them aren't. So it just went so well for us.
Yeah.
But, those are the kind of things we were thinking about. And we were able to hit the nail on the head, be there in the right way at the right time.
You mentioned about the idea of it coming off jokey and almost like as a novelty act. But to me, I mean, you're dealing with something that the approach is very disarming, without necessarily being a joke, without necessarily being a novelty act. But, interestingly enough, back in the 80s, I mean, you had a number of punk bands that used humor and a certain level of shock value to get their point across. I'm thinking like the Mentors or the Meatmen, for example. I mean, I'm sorry, I still think One Down, Three to Go about the Beatles is one of the funniest songs I've ever heard. As offensive as it is, it still makes me laugh. But even as I'm listening to your music in the Pansy Division, there's a part of me that just I laugh at it, but I see the point of it, and especially in the context of the time, it's like. If you're a gay kid and you're unable to live your life as you need to or want to, this is really eye-opening, great stuff that serves a very big, important, larger purpose. To me, it can't be a joke if it's serving that purpose.
So there was I listened to the Meatmen in the 80s, and they had this song called Tooling for Anus.
Yes.
And I thought, okay, I can enjoy being part of the humor, but I felt like I was just being laughed at.
Right.
Like not laughed with. It's like, okay, they're just making fun of somebody being gay. How fucking clever. Because humor was their point. And you might giggle at it or chuckle at it, but it's a funny title. But I feel like for us, we could have the humor and also have substance. And that was important to me. So behind the surface, which might be humorous or lighthearted, there was something else deeper there if you wanted it. And I think there's some people listening to us who didn't want it. And, that's okay. You can't make people think the way you do about your record.
Right.
Even though you have a certain intent about it.
But it certainly draws the important distinction between the idea of humor just being introduced gratuitously as opposed to humor being used with purpose. And that is a very, very important distinction between the two.
I remember I had this sort of light bulb moment, probably in the early 80s. I was in my early 20s. So I was watching this Eddie Murphy comedy special, and Eddie Murphy would tell like jokes about gay people. And I was laughing. And then I thought, it just suddenly got me. I thought, fuck you. You do not, we are just punching bags. It's like, yeah, I can have a sense of humor. I can laugh at myself. I can laugh at certain aspects of gay life. But what is the intent? And Eddie Murphy's intent was just to make fun of and, deny the humanity of. So I haven't listened to Eddie Murphy anything.
Yeah.
Now it's been, I think, 40 years. So, you at a certain time, you get a certain awareness about, the intent of, certain kinds of humor. Are they with you or are they against you? Well, he was against us.
Interestingly enough, though, over the years, and especially maybe in the last decade or even less, I think our society has become much more accepting of things and of people and of their orientation than ever before. And it's not to suggest that we're beyond prejudice or hatred. There's certainly plenty of it still out there, but things have come an awful long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I had the idea for Pansy Division in the 80s, but it seemed like this far-fetched, ridiculous idea. Like, I have lots of ideas. Like, I once thought I should start a company making misfortune cookies, where you get a fortune cookie and it has some horrible thing on it that is your message. So I have lots of ideas, and I kind of thought that Pansy Division was one of those ideas, but then the moment seemed right. So I keep saying this in this interview about timing. So it wouldn't have worked if we'd come along 3 years earlier or 5 years earlier. Definitely not 10 years earlier. And part of it is that there wasn't this indie label infrastructure in America in the 80s. It really didn't develop fully until the 90s, where if you put an indie record out, there was a distribution network that could reasonably get your record into the stores that wanted it. In the 80s, I worked in the store, and it could be it could be really hard to find things. That got easier, and as things got easier, things are able to sell more, which meant more records were able to come out. So it was a virtuous circle there. But yeah, the 90s, it was important that we came out in the 90s.
So looking at the way things are now, what do you see has been like the biggest change in the way people have accepted people of different orientations or how their perceptions have changed in 2024? Because I have kids who are in their 20s, and the way that they've accepted people with everything from gender identity to pronouns, everything. I'm so impressed by how the younger generation has so readily accepted the changes within people. I mean, it's a remarkable change in psyche. Because I certainly remember how people used to talk about gay people and about trans people. It is so different now. What do you think is the biggest change there has been in the last 5 years or so?
The internet is the answer. That is how people can find each other, how people can find out about things outside of their immediate circle. And as much as the internet giveth, the internet taketh. It's this wonderful, horrible thing we live with. And that is definitely one of the positive aspects of it is, you can see what's going on in the world and it normalizes it. On the other hand, it also can rally the enemy. So people who see all these things have this visceral reaction against it. And it's just, because of the internet, and then after that, social media, we just end up having these extremely polarized sets of people in the country without a ton of overlap or people in the middle. So you've got all these people who, they've whipped up this hysteria about how gay people and trans people are out to destroy your values. Honey, we want life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, just like you do. But for you, it means going to church and being a Christian, maybe. Well, good for you. I don't want to be. I don't care if you are. But they care what we are. That is the difference. They want to strike down what we are because they think their way is superior and God's chosen, etc. So, I don't want people telling me what to believe, but I think the public should be allowed to have their pursuit of happiness, which doesn't mean shutting down other people's pursuit of happiness.
Right.
That is the intent with all these anti-gay laws, anti-trans laws, anti-choice laws. It's that assertion that we are right and you are wrong, and not, yes, we can live together. We have to assert our identity, and they claim that our presence is undermining their identity. That is a pretty weak basis then, if we're able to upend that so easily.
I think there's a difference between people's ideology and people individually. I think a lot of that gets chipped away with individual relationships with people. But then we also have this have this tribal sense of humanity where we're all on one side and have to be on one side. But I think when you talk to people, they're a whole lot more accepting and see through a lot of that bullshit that you're talking about. Where people are landing on one side or another and not seeing the gray that's in between all of us.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I just watched this program earlier this year. It's a series, I think it's a Netflix series. It's called We're Here, in which drag queens go to small towns and try to put on a drag show in really conservative places. The episodes I saw were in Oklahoma and Tennessee, in smaller towns. And it's really interesting to see who will rally for you and who will be steadfast against it. I mean, by showing up, they make people choose sides, or at least stand. They may not want to take a side, but they don't like what the other side is doing to us, so they will stand up for us publicly. And then that was really fascinating to watch. But musically, we're a band, we play music, and now anything goes with the age of, streaming music. People can find, I mean, it can be hard to be found, but things can be found that they couldn't in the past. So when we were starting out, you had to buy our records, because unless someone else played it for you, we were getting scant radio play. Right. A lot of our best songs can't even get played on the radio. So that's a drawback. But so we were, I think, a quintessential word of mouth band, aided by being able to go on tour with Green Day, who picked us because we were the unorthodox choice that would say something about them and their values. We got a lot of fans and a lot of mileage out of that, and had an experience we never would have expected to have. It's like being able to play in arenas, opening for Green Day. When we started this band, we're never going to get near an arena. Like, that seemed, if that's what you want to do, then you're just delusional. But by being authentic and sticking to that, it really got us places. Sometimes people ask me how you start a band now and get there, and I'm like, don't ask me, I have no idea.
And you mentioned, the importance of timing and how that's, really kind of informed your whole career. I mean, you couldn't have picked better timing to join Green Day on a tour than when the Dookie album comes out. I mean, you couldn't write a better script than that. But one of the things that is happening now is you've just re-released the 30th anniversary reissue of
Undressed. We just reissued our vinyl of Undressed, which has been out of print. We've had some to sell at shows. We ran out of those a couple years ago, but it hasn't really been available for since we left Lookout 20 plus years ago. So this label, Sounds Rad, is run by this great guy who is a big Lookout Records fan, and has reissued just about every Mr. T experience record that existed ever. And now he's starting to work on our catalog. So, it's really exciting to have that happening right now, alongside, still being a band and being able to, go out and play 30 years later, and have your 30th anniversary album with you on tour to sell.
It's funny, as I'm on the Pansy Division website, I'm looking at the schedule of shows. Obviously, you're coming to the Malden, like we talked about before, but then I also saw that back earlier in the year, I think it was in June, You were at the Mosswood Meltdown Festival in Oakland with the B-52s and Red Cross, and I felt like my brain was about to explode. I can't imagine how freaking amazing that must have been to be, on a stage with every band that's involved, but like those two in particular. It's like, oh my God, that sounded like it had to be fantastic.
It was a fantastic and really exhausting day.
I bet.
It was wonderful. It was just so much fun. And the Mosswood Festival, for those of you that don't know it, is the MC is John Waters, who creates a fantastical, fictitious description of every band that's just so overblown. But it's great. It's like he's like the king of trash, and there's like a trashy element to it. It's fun. It can be serious, but it's got this aspect of fun to it. It's not a big festival, so it's very manageable. I don't know how many people were there. Maybe at the most for the B-52s, maybe 5,000, 4,000. Wow. So it's not a huge event, but it takes place in a park in Oakland, 4th of July.
But just seeing who's on that bill, I'm like going, that sounds a whole lot bigger than a $20 all ages show at a brewery in Malden. That sounds like, not that there's anything wrong with that, but that sounds like it had to be just so much fun to watch.
Well, to play with the B-52s, I've been listening to since I was a teenager.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, fucking fantastic. And they were great.
And I've become like a really big fan of Red Cross over the years too. It's another great, fun band. But your show on in Malden is coming up on the 19th at the Faces Brewing, and it's going to be a great night. I'm so glad we had a chance to talk tonight. It's a real pleasure to talk to you, Jon. So thank you so much.
Mike, thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.
Pansy Division will be at Faces Brewing Company on September 19th. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like it, review it, share it with people. Be sure to follow us all over social media. You can also email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram for their support in Chicopee, and thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.